On this edition of Independent Sources, The Emerging Majority. A new book explores the history of the emerging minority majority and the implications for this year's and future elections. And Battling the Body Brigade, why Black women feel that they're being squeezed out of the conversation about promoting positive body images for plus-size women. Those stories and more coming up. Welcome to Independent Sources, bringing you news from New York's ethnic and immigrant communities. I'm Abby Ashola. The election season is shifting into high gear, and a new book by civil rights lawyer and senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, Steve Phillips, explores the growing base of voters that are sure to be courted in the coming weeks. The book is titled Brown is the New White, and in part delves into the two significant pieces of legislation behind the explosive growth in the country's minority and immigrant populations. Despite the fact that many estimate that these groups may form the majority of voters by 2040, Phillips says the Republicans in particular still vacillate between seduction and suppression of these voters. Gary Pierre spoke with the author, Steve Phillips, for this week's On the Shelf.
Steve, you trace this demographic change, if you will, to two seminal moments in 1965. First, the Voting Rights Act in 1965, the Immigration and Naturalization Act. So first, let's talk about the Voting Rights Act. How did that bring about the changes that we're seeing today?
Right. So yeah, both of those laws that came out of the civil rights movement in general and came out of the Selma to Montgomery and that whole Selma voting rights struggle in particular were transformative in terms of U.S. politics, in terms of creating the conditions to make major changes, right? So Jesse Jackson talks about the Voting Rights Act was written in blood before it was signed in ink. And with people like Jimmy Lee Jackson and Reverend James Reeb, Viola Liuzzo giving their lives in order to make these types of changes actually occur. So what the Voting Rights Act did was it really took down the whites-only signs from the voting booths, in that it was essentially legal, if not certainly widely practiced, to ban, put all sorts of barriers and obstacles in the path of Black folks who wanted to vote. And so this eliminated that as a legal measure, put in place protections in terms of the Justice Department, and it's not an accident that the number of African Americans in elected office, increased from like a few hundred to several thousand in the years after that, and that millions of African Americans were actually finally able to vote after the Voting Rights Act was implemented.
Okay, and then what about the Immigration and Naturalization Act?
Yeah, so that's something which I think a lot of people don't really understand or appreciate, and I didn't really know as much until I was able to do the research for the book here, is that actually the day after LBJ gave his speech to Congress on the Voting Rights Act, where he said, "We shall overcome," which is one of the most social justice speeches I think a president's ever given to a joint session of Congress. The next day, he convened his top advisors, says, "I want to do a whole bunch of things with this moment, with this opportunity." And so one of the things he wanted to move forward was the Immigration and Nationality Act, which, in terms of something else that I didn't know, most people probably don't know, that it was essentially illegal for anyone not white to become a U.S. citizen explicitly until 1952, and then as a practical matter until the Immigration and Nationality Act passed. The definition of a citizen went back to the 1790 law that you had to be a free white person. And the Supreme Court upheld that all the way up until the 1920s explicitly. So with the Immigration and Nationality Act basically took down the whites-only signs to being able to enter the country. Mm-hmm. And so the world is, 80+% people of color, but the U.S. was 90%, nearly 90% white. And so we finally now have the people of the world being able to enter and become part of the family and create a more multiracial society. And since that time, people of color have gone from 12% of the U.S. to 38% of the U.S., mm-hmm. and that creates the cornerstones for this new American majority.
Okay, and another key component to your thesis in the book is the role of the progressive whites play in this troika, if you will. And so talk to us a little bit more about that segment of the population in the context of the book.
Yeah, and that's actually critical, because that much of the conversation about the demographic changes is that, well, in 2044, people of color will be the majority, and there's like this undercurrent of like, well, then watch out, white people, right? So it creates this kind of false dichotomy that all people of color are going to be against all white people, and somewhere down the road there's going to be this reckoning. And there's two problems with that. One is that 2044 is a long way away, and so even if one wanted to go that route, that's quite far down the road. But more significantly is that we have a majority right now, and that's the point I'm trying to make in the book, is that this new American majority elected Obama, and more importantly, re-elected Obama when he had 5 million fewer white votes. And the reason we're able to do that is because people of color have grown so large, 12% to 38%, and there is and has always been a meaningful minority of whites who have sided with people of color and who have been social justice advocates, from abolitionist days in slavery time to the civil rights movement to now. And so that, the best data set, I believe, is the exit polls in terms of elections, is roughly 40% of the white population. And so that meaningful minority is enough, allied with the overwhelming majority of people of color, to comprise this new American majority.
Okay. So now, how is this new reality, as you describe it, manifesting itself in this year's electoral campaigns?
Well, it's interesting. It was fascinating, actually, in this campaign. So if you look at after 2012, the Republicans were really moving in more of a direction of trying to both seduce and suppress the growing voters of color in this new American majority. I talk in the chapter 8 of the book around conservatives can count. And a lot of them can, and they did, and they detailed and fairly sophisticated autopsy of why they lost in 2012, showing they need to really make inroads with and embrace and invest in people of color. And they've done a lot of that, electing a lot of statewide elected officials of color, looking at the presidential race.
Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio.
Candidates, and Ben Carson for a whole time period in there.
Yes.
So they there's a meaningful sector of the Republican Party which understands this. There's another sector which is very fearful of these changes and then is providing the energy for really this backlash, which is what is propelling Donald Trump forward. And so they're having a civil war on the Republican side around which direction are they going to go. Are they going to double down on the George Wallace repression side, or are they going to try to move more towards the inclusive, trying to co-opt some sector of the people of color piece? And that's really what's going to play itself out in this next period. And now you're seeing on the Democratic side, both of the candidates starting to better understand that they need to embrace people of color and they need to invest heavily in those communities and adopt our issues. Hillary put a racial justice tab on her website. Bernie has incorporated language around institutional racism into his rhetoric. And so they're moving more deliberately towards embracing our communities as well.
You know, Steve, I'm fascinated by the Republicans, as you call it, civil war, because I've always maintained that a lot of new Americans, people of color as we call them, espouse some serious conservative values that I think could be very appealing to the Republican Party, and yet there's this sort of like almost a suicidal attempt to push away the people who could be voting Republican. How do they reconcile with that?
Well, that's what they're trying to thread that needle. It says historically, really since the late 60s, the Republicans have built their base and their electoral coalition on the fears, resentments, and anxieties of whites about people of color. And so from Nixon's Law and Order campaigns to George Bush's Willie Horton piece. So it's very difficult for them to thread this needle around demonizing people of color as a way to rile up their base, to get their people to turn out on the one hand, and then embracing people of color on the other hand by showing that they may actually have some something that is worth looking at.
Mm-hmm. So there's this coalition. Is it a boon for Democrats? Are we likely to see a Democratic majority in the White House, well, in Congress and in the White House this election cycle?
The numbers are there, but the sense of urgency I feel, what really drove me to write this book, is that too few people in the Democratic Party and the progressive movement properly understand it, and they're not moving with the level of urgency that is necessary to consolidate it. So Obama's election represented the tipping point. His re-election really affirmed that this majority exists. But the party leadership and progressive movement has not followed a pace in terms of investing massive amounts of money in the community, creating an infrastructure, supporting organizations, elevating leaders from these communities. And the failure to do that puts them at great risk. Okay. And so the election and the power is there for the taking if the progressives and the Democrats will run towards people of color instead of away from them. But that is the essential debate happening right now on the Democratic side.
One of the things you talked about in the book that was fascinating to me was that understanding the failure of the midterms elections that the Democratic Party faced, where they were choosing liberal whites or independent whites at the expense of new voters of color. And have they learned the lessons this time around?
Right, absolutely. So that I talk in the book about there being a tyranny of the white swing voter, and that politics in this country has historically been a battle between progressive whites and conservative whites for the more moderate whites in the middle. And that's been the modus operandi for the Democratic Party for many, many, many years. And so despite the fact that Obama was elected on this new coalition, nonetheless, the approach was, well, we still have to fight for this shrinking sector of the conservative white swing voters in the middle, rather than inspiring and organizing and mobilizing and appealing to the voters of color. And so they ran away from the black president. They ran away from health care, which was seen as a giveaway to people of color. They ran away from immigration reform. And so people of color are like, well, what's in this for me? Why should I be bothered to actually turn out? Democratic turnout, the Republican drop-off from 2008, 2010 was 7 million votes. The Democratic drop-off was 26 million votes. That's why Democrats lost the House, and that's why they lost the Senate.
Quickly, we're running out of time soon, but I'd like for you to talk to answer this question. Have the so-called progressive and the Democratic Party learned from those lessons?
Well, we'll see. We don't know yet. They've learned a little bit, but they're going to spend close to $3 billion on the Democratic side. 46% of Democratic voters are people of color. Unless they're spending close to half of that money investing in communities of color, partnering with community of color organizations, hiring staff from those areas, hiring consultants, then they have not learned. But if they have learned, they will win. And if they haven't, then they will lose.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. Steve Phillips, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The book, Brown is the New White, is available online and in bookstores. When we come back, debating body image issues and why some women are feeling left out of the conversation. Before that, Crystal Lowe has some other news.
Thanks, Abby. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic and community media. El Diario La Prensa reports on the Tenant Support Unit, or TSU. The TSU was created in July 2015 to allow tenants to stay in their homes and protect affordable housing in quickly gentrifying neighborhoods. TSU members go door to door through the city, educating tenants about their rights, documenting construction violations, collecting harassment and eviction complaints, and offering information on city-sponsored free legal referrals. The TSU has already resolved 1,000 cases of tenant complaints of harassment by landlords and poor living conditions. While Mayor Bill de Blasio is being praised for his work with the TSU, he has come under fire for his lack of response to the Lower East Side and Chinatown neighborhoods protests against the construction of the Extel luxury apartment building at 227 Cherry Street. The Extel Development Company has carried on with construction despite multiple resident complaints to City Hall. Aside from the noise and the dust, residents say that the construction is being done on unstable ground and nearby buildings are feeling the aftershocks. Door frames have been moved and cracks are forming within and around the other neighborhood homes and buildings. The Coalition to Protect Chinatown and LES believe that the builders have a total disregard for the quality of life of the residents who live in the neighborhood. That also from El Diario. The Amsterdam News writes about the possible closure of Rikers Island because of the recent controversies surrounding corruption, violence, abuse, and neglect within the jail. The paper reports that City Council Speaker Melissa Mark Veverito is just one of the politicians calling for the facility's closure. Rikers Island has an average daily population of between 10,000 and 11,000 prisoners, which makes any consideration of decommissioning the jail difficult. Mayor Bill de Blasio believes closing Rikers is a noble goal. However, the mayor also made it clear that significant challenges must be addressed before that can be achieved. A year-long commission is underway to study these concerns, and the mayor will have a representative on the commission to work collaboratively on these issues. Queens Latino highlighted the plight of flyer distributors by profiling two grandmothers who worked through holidays and extreme temperatures, handing out flyers to often nonchalant New Yorkers. Rosa Diaz is 64 and Blanca Leon is 63. The two of them are among the 5,000 workers who are unprotected in the city. That means that they can have no recourse if the money from their $9 an hour gig is stolen by their employers. The founder of the Laundry Workers Center United, Virgilio Aran, who is an advocate for people like Diaz and Leon, says there is no legislation in place to protect such workers. And finally, the foreword highlights an intimate portrait of author Eli Gottlieb and his autistic brother Josh that's explored in his short documentary titled The Invaluable Bond. Eli became Josh's sole caregiver after their mother passed away. Josh is now 60 years old and living in an assisted living campus. The short film hopes to raise awareness of the disease and is available on YouTube. Those are just a few headlines from the city's ethnic and community media. Independent Sources will be right back.
Thanks for staying tuned. This month, Ebony Magazine debuted its latest cover story titled The Body Brigade, featuring 4 beautiful plus-sized women: style blogger Gabby Fresh, singer-songwriter Jasmine Sullivan, Orange is the New Black star Danielle Brooks, and another well-loved recording artist, Chrisette Michele. The Twitterverse and Instagram world praised the publication for very distinct reasons. Though body-positive movements have become popular, many plus-size Black women have felt left out of the mainstream conversation on the phenomenon. Has Ebony changed this? I spoke to writer-activist Quita Tinsley to get her take on the issue. Welcome, Quita. How are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Thanks for joining us.
You're so very welcome.
Thank you. So, recently you wrote about body positivity movements that are, currently going around in the mainstream. And Ebony Magazine just premiered its Body Brigade cover featuring 4 Black women that are plus size. But in your writings, you've said that you feel that Black women are being left out of the body positivity movement. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you feel about this Ebony cover now? Do you feel things are moving in the right direction?
I do. So I feel like in the article I talk about, if you Google body positivity, most of the images are of white people, most specifically seemingly cisgender white women. And we aren't seeing people like Black women being praised the way that Rebel Wilson or Melissa McCarthy are. And Ebony featuring not 1, but 4 Black women who are plus size, kind of going the extra mile in a way, in ways that we haven't seen before. And it's great. And they didn't choose 4 light-skinned Black women. They chose women of varying shades, which was another great thing to see. Seeing a dark-skinned Black woman on the cover of Ebony, plus-size Black woman, is not something that you see every day.
That's very true. And why do you feel that Black women and other women of marginalized communities are being excluded from this mainstream conversation?
I think it's a part of racism, right? So even when we're attacking patriarchy and sizeism, racism is still a part of that. And so we are only seeing white folks. And so we have to realize those intersections and have visibility of people of color as well. Not just Black folks, but other folks of color as well.
Very true. I want to point out that Precious Lee, she's a Black plus-size model. She was recently featured in Sports Illustrated, but for an ad for Lane Bryant. And she's the first plus-size African-American woman to be featured in Sports Illustrated. What do you feel about that?
I think it's great that they would have a Lane Bryant ad in Sports Illustrated, but it's also kind of double-sided, as the only way she could be in that magazine is if she was a model for Lane Bryant and they chose to run a Lane Bryant ad, and why wouldn't Sports Illustrated themselves have a model who was plus size. But I think they recently did, in their bikini issue, have...
I think she was on the cover. Ashley Graham, I believe?
Yes, Ashley Graham, yes.
Yeah, that was a pretty big deal.
Yeah,
I also want to point out Gabri Sibide. She's a large woman, and I think we could compare her to Tess Holliday, who's size 22. I don't want to compare, but in terms of a similarity. And, you know, Gabri, she's been able to get roles, and her current role, I would say, isn't as typecast as, you know, the usual roles that are given to heavier Black women. Do you feel that her career is going to be a good example of how we're supposed to now see Black women of, you know, larger sizes?
Right. I think it is. Her being on Empire and her being someone who's sexually active and someone who's desired by someone, that's something that we typically do not see for Black women in general on television. They're typically not desired in ways, but especially not plus size or fat Black women, dark skinned Black women. I think this part about being desirable is really important because folks kind of want to have fat people on screen to say that they're there as like the fat best friend who's funny. But having a fully complex person being visible and being desired is really important as well.
Yeah. And after the scene that you're talking about from Empire, where she was, you know, kissing her boyfriend, and she got a lot of backlash for that. You know, there was a lot of ridicule online. So I wonder if there's still this pushback when it comes to Black women, or is this something that we're seeing across the board?
I think it's definitely the intersections of her being a dark-skinned Black woman and her being a fat Black woman, and not plus size or curvy, but she is someone who is above a size 20. And so how dare she be on TV kissing someone, and this person who's skinnier than she is find her desirable. And I think that's why it's important that the body positivity movements are becoming more mainstream, to push back and say that, no, we can be desirable, we can be valued, no matter what our bodies look like or are, and pushing back against racism and sizeism and sexism.
You've mentioned in the past that you feel that, you know, these new terms like curvy and plus size, you take issue with them. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Right. So I identify as fat. It was a term that as a child I ran away from because people are like, you don't want to be fat, you don't want to be sloppy. And it's like, I am fat and I'm happy with that. And we kind of put this negative connotation on the word fat, and we try to like hide it and fluff it with words like curvy or plus size, which those words are real and valid if that's how you identify yourself or your body. But I think these words have also been a way to push away from fat. And I think we need to make room for people who do identify as fat and aren't trying to fluff their bodies or their identities, and are real about the ways that they show up in the world.
So what would you like to see going forward in terms of representation? What would you like to see?
I would like to see a lot more representation across the board, of more of bigger bodies being shown, of disabled folks being shown more. So Winnie Harlow, the model who has vitiligo, who was on, I think, America's Next Top Model, like how great is that she
She's
could
awesome.
not only be a model, but be on a visible platform on television. So more displays of folks with varying bodies, I think is a problem when we choose someone like Tess Holliday and she's the spokesperson for a movement or for all bodies that aren't within the mainstream, when she's not, right? Because Tess Holliday is white and she's attractive in ways that have brought her popularity. And so we have to show varying bodies of people who aren't attractive, and let them have space as well.
I hear that. Thank you so much, Quita, for being on the show.
My pleasure.
That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.